How goes it, ladies and gentlemen? Today, we're going to be checking out a PlayStation 1 game, which is a little bit unusual for the channel. You can tell it's a PlayStation 1 game because, well, that. So what are we looking at today? Well, we're actually going to be looking at the first game in one of my favorite series that unfortunately is also a series that's been criminally neglected as of late. Seeing as you clicked on the video, you probably already know, but just in case, this is Bloody Roar, the original. This game came out in 1997, originally released for the arcades, and then slightly later that year got a port to the PlayStation 1. As far as I know, they're pretty much identical, I think, although I haven't done an extreme amount of research on that. I've never actually played the arcade version. So what is it? If you've never heard of Bloody Roar, it is a 3D fighting game. There are many 3D fighting games, however, Bloody Roar does enough different to set itself apart. And in fact, the central mechanic of the game, I was going to call it a gimmick, but it's really not a gimmick because it is so, important to the actual gameplay, is that each character has a regular human form and then a beast mode that they can transform into. And like I mentioned, far from being a gimmick, this actually opens up a lot more possibilities in terms of attacks that you can do, different strategies that you can employ, and just generally it makes a lot of the game a lot more interesting. Now, this being the first in the series, you might expect that it would be fairly jank and not really worth playing. I mean, think like Dead or Alive 1 or Street Fighter 1. Usually those aren't really worth checking out. And although I do agree that if you're going to check out Bloody Roar, you should probably start with the sequels, like ideally Bloody Roar 3 probably, or at least Bloody Roar 2. This one actually still holds up reasonably well. The idea here is we're going to be covering all of the games on the channel, so I figured why not start with the first one, right? It makes a reasonable amount of sense. By the way, the game holds up thing that I was going with just now does not apply to the 3D renders in the intro, which look absolutely atrocious. But in motion, the game actually looks pretty good. It does not look like the intro, fortunately. So before we get started, we are going to be playing on max difficulty, because why not? Keep things a little bit interesting. However, I should mention that you should not be expecting any super high-level play here. Although I do enjoy fighting games, I'm not an expert at them, and especially not at this relatively obscure one. But I think I'm good enough to show you a little bit of what the gameplay looks like. So yeah, those character select images look just terrible. Ugh. But anyways, we're going to be playing as Long, who is, in fact, the tiger. Now, obviously, we're looking at PlayStation 1 graphics here. We're talking low poly models, not great texture quality, and then all those jagged lines. But you will notice, primarily because of the game's silky smooth frame rate, it actually looks pretty good in motion, and it is as responsive as it looks, which means that it's actually still pretty pleasant to play. Now, another thing that makes this game interesting is that each of the characters plays quite a bit differently, and not even just in terms of this is a fast character, this is a slow character, this is a grappler, that kind of thing. They actually have different ways of doing their moves. Now, that said, the majority of special attacks are still going to be performed with quarter circles, and each character has their basic combos that usually take the form of punch, 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 kick, or punch, punch, forward punch, down kick, that sort of thing. But certain characters, Long especially, have a little bit of different systems, which we'll get into, but we'll start with the basic layout of the controls. Basically, you have a punch button, a kick button, a grab button, and a beast button. So punch and kick do what you might expect, grab does what you might expect. Beast is the somewhat interesting one. You notice we have a B gauge underneath the life bar. That is, in fact, the Beast gauge. Surprise, surprise. And as you might expect, it goes up as you either take damage or deal damage. However, when you transform into beast mode, and thus consume the gauge, it actually will go down as you get hit, which means that you can transform into beast mode and then get knocked out of it. Now, the reason you would want to be in beast mode is because you gain increased attack power and also a bit of health regeneration. Actually, pretty rapid health regeneration. You'll recover essentially out to the light blue bar, and what this means is that you can actually turn the tides pretty dramatically in the middle of a round. In addition to that, you also gain access to new attacks that are performed by pressing, you guessed it, the Beast button. So that little kick combo cannot be performed while in human form. You know, you would press Beast to transform into Beast, but then you can actually do combos with Beast, you can do quarter circle moves, and it just opens up some additional, attacks that you can use. So the real strategy of the game comes in the form of knowing when to use your Beast mode. You'll notice that right as we start the match, we both have access to Beast mode. But the thing is, you might not want to use it right away, although in this case, Gato is using it to kind of beat the crap out of me. What I can do is hold on to my Beast mode, and now all of a sudden I've knocked him out of it, he can't transform back and get his health back. And so there's a little bit of a strategic element involved there. Do you want to transform right away and try to just take out your opponent as quickly as possible? Do you want to hang on to it so you can get some of that health regeneration? Because the position you really don't want to be in is where you have no beast gauge and your opponent does. All in all, it's actually a pretty good system. So now I'm in a little bit of a bad spot because he can transform into beast, but I can't until I get a little bit more of my gauge back. You'll also notice that as you transform into beast mode, you can do attacks out of it, but you can also use it while standing still, and it will sort of do a big knockback, which means that if you're in the middle of getting comboed, you can use that to sort of break free. Although the game actually has another couple options to break free of combos, which add a little bit of depth. There is a basic dodge that you can do by pressing forward and lock, I believe. And that will allow you to sort of dodge around to your opponent's back. Useful if you do it at sort of a longer attack in the middle of a combo. And in addition, each character has a, I'm not sure what the technical term that the manual calls them is, but it is a block attack. And so what this is, Longs is this sort of elbow charge thing. I'll do it here in a second. Okay. Well, she just did one there. So essentially what it does is it does this little charge animation. During that charge animation, you will automatically block any basic incoming attacks. Not low attacks and not grabs, that kind of thing. But like right there, for instance, I was able to do that attack, block a couple basic hits, and then get that knockback. So you can use that as well to get out of combos. And the thing is, you can be low attacked out of it or thrown out of it, and it also tends to be pretty easy to punish. So it remains balanced, but you can definitely use it to your advantage. Okay, I just got played there. The later games would actually add a little bit of a different system. I mean, you still have the block attacks, but you would actually gain these dodges that function similar to like a perfect guard, where you would get punished if you missed, but if you timed perfectly, you would be able to dodge an attack to, easily break a combo. But we'll worry more about those when we actually get to those games. So hopefully you've noticed so far that the characters are all pretty different and pretty interesting. Now, unfortunately, not all of the characters actually made it into the later games. Fox, for instance, did not make it in, but fortunately did make it into Smash Brothers, so that was good. Someone that was more committed to that horrible joke would actually splice in like the dodge sound effects from Smash Brothers, but I'm not that dedicated, unfortunately. You can just imagine it. Mitsuko, who we just fought, didn't make it in, and then Greg didn't make it into the sequels. However, all the more interesting characters did make it in, and a couple of the characters got incorporated into other characters. But we'll, again, worry about that when we get to the sequels. So one of the things that I mentioned was the way that some of the characters operate, and specifically I'm talking about Long. I think all the other characters are pretty similar in terms of punch, 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 kick, punch, 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 down kick, that kind of thing. Long has a little bit of a different system that would be carried over into some of the characters in the sequels, in that he has sort of a branching combo system, like almost like a make-your-own combo. He has certain moves that launch him into this state, so the basic one that I'm typically doing here is punch, 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 and at that point, you can branch off the combo in many different ways. So each direction plus button has a different one. So there's a forward and punch, a backwards and punch, down and punch, and then the same for kicks, as well as ways that you can also lengthen the combo. It has a few advantages and a few disadvantages. I mean, the advantage is that you basically have a huge number of different variations on your combo that you can do. The disadvantage is because you're typically starting your combo in only a few different ways, it can be fairly predictable, but it's kind of made up for by the fact that you can, do these really long combos and sort of vary the finisher of each one. So it just makes it a little bit more interesting. I guess I didn't mention it yet, did I? I figured what we would do as we go through each of the games is play a different character each time. Like, why would I want to just play Long over and over? So we'll show off a little bit of how the different characters go, and hopefully I don't get, shown up here by the computer playing as Long to show that I'm not actually that great at this game. I mean, he already apparently chose the better color palette, so that's unfortunate, but it's okay. Now, one thing you might have noticed, like that for instance, is that a lot of the attacks tend to be pretty brutal in this game. I mean, we're talking like blood flying everywhere, people getting slashed with claws, and broken necks, and that sort of thing, as we'll see later. And the thing about it is that because the gore tends to be a little bit understated in comparison to something like Mortal Kombat, where it's funny, because it's so over the top. Like, that just looks really brutal and horrible. Funnily enough, when they brought this to GameCube, not this, but one of the sequels, I guess because it was Nintendo, they ended up replacing the blood with sparks, and it looked really, really weird. But again, we'll get to that when we get to that game. But yeah, there's something about the gore that is just really ugh, makes you cringe a little bit. Which, hey, that might be kind of a plus, honestly. Nice. So let's say you want to play Bloody Roar. What are your options? Your options are actually pretty good. So the game, obviously, as I mentioned, was released physically on the PlayStation. I did a little bit of research before doing this, and it's not incredibly expensive. We're talking anywhere between 20 to 30 American dollary dues, which is a little bit steep, in my opinion. I mean, if you're collecting the games, sure. But would I pay $20 for this versus some other game? Probably not. However, you are in luck, and not just because there's always the emulation route, of course, but the game is actually available on the PlayStation Store, and in the US it's something like $7 or something, which, yeah, I could see that. Especially the sequel, Bloody Roar 2 is on there, and I would probably get that one instead. Unless you can track down Bloody Roar 3, which unfortunately is not on the PlayStation Store. Unfortunate, because that's probably the best one in the series, in my opinion. And I think Bloody Roar 3 is unfortunately a little bit more expensive. But I think as I was looking at it, I mean, there were some that were maybe no manual in a different case that were not too bad. We're talking more like $30 or so. But anyways, yeah, the good thing is it was released on the PlayStation Store as a digital download, so very easy to acquire. I don't think it's available on any other platforms. Like, we haven't gotten Bloody Roar on PC, other than, you know, Bloody Roar emulated. So I guess technically maybe we did get it on PC. Almost to the end here. As you might imagine, doing a run through arcade mode doesn't take an extremely long amount of time. So how did the game do when it first came out? Well, it obviously did well enough to warrant getting multiple sequels. I was checking that out, and apparently it did review pretty well. One of the things that the reviewers praised was the incredibly smooth gameplay and frame rate, which I already mentioned. It is really noticeable, even today. The graphics actually, I mean, again, keep in mind, this was the late 90s, 97. These graphics are pretty good for 1997. And it seems that people did like the characters, although considered them maybe not quite as iconic as, like, you know, Street Fighter or something. But, I mean, Street Fighter is such a cultural phenomenon that it's pretty hard to be more iconic than Street Fighter. Like, people that don't play games know Street Fighter, right? But I think personally that all these characters do hold up, and they're interesting enough that you can definitely recognize them. In addition to that, the reviewers did like the soundtrack for the most part. Some didn't like them too much. The soundtrack in all the games is actually pretty good, and it's sort of like a 80s power metal soundtrack. Or maybe more heavy metal than power metal. What's cool, though, is that all of the tracks are real instruments. I mean, we're not using samples. These are legit guitars and everything, which I can appreciate. I do actually have the soundtrack for Bloody Roar 3, which is a pretty good soundtrack. And overall, although most of the tracks probably won't be super memorable, they do fit the action. And here we go, we've made it to our final boss. You will notice that as I fight our final boss, Uriko, I decide to resort to somewhat cheap strategies of baiting that attack and then using my block attack. That is because I cannot beat Uriko without using this strategy, especially on maximum difficulty. Like, that was a single combo, and I'm at 50% health. I mean, it's sort of in a long tradition of incredibly cheap final bosses, right? Oh boy, that's intimidating. Yeah, so her beast form works a little bit differently, in that she starts as human, and then as we get her beast gauge down, then she transforms. And this form, as you might imagine, will kill you very, very quickly. The way that I found to beat this boss most easily is you bait a couple different attacks, the spinning one, or the little energy ball one, and then use some sort of long-range lunge attack, like so. The thing is, the CPU is relatively good at predicting, or let's be honest, reading your inputs, and so trying to do combos like that doesn't tend to work out too well. Oh boy, this is going to be close. I'm going to ruin a little bit of the magic here for you, though, and just admit that I'm post-commentating this, so I already know what's going to happen. It's okay, though. Oh boy. Oh boy. Not good. Nice. So that was a Bloody Roar for the PlayStation. We're going to get a little story, and I use the term story loosely. It's a fighting game story. What do you expect? Long's thing is that he doesn't like the ability to turn into a tiger, and wants to be rid of that. We get some cheesy dialogue that moves very, very quickly across the screen, as I'm sure you noticed there. Hope you can read fast. I will not listen to you, ever! Yeah, so that's something, huh? Funnily enough, I actually forgot to mention this. The game was released with slightly different titles. Um, Bloody Roar, okay, Bloody Roar Hyper Beast Duel, and in North America, Beasterizer. Not the best title, perhaps. I mean, I might respond to that with Beasterizer. I hardly know her. I might, but I probably wouldn't reply to it that way. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little look at Bloody Roar. At some point down the line, I will be checking out all the sequels. In fact, spoiler alert, I already have a couple of them recorded, just waiting to be commentated and uploaded. Definitely worth checking out. Fairly easy to acquire, and thus, yeah, I would recommend it. Maybe someday we'll get a sequel. That would be nice. But I'm not holding my breath. I hope you enjoyed, everybody. Forgot to mention, I will be uploading a long play version of this playthrough, so that would be all the way through, no commentary, if that interests you. If not, hopefully I will see you on the next video. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll leave you with the credits.
Congratulations! Thank you for playing.
You're welcome for playing.